Welcome to today's webinar. Apologies for the technical issue there. Today we're going to be talking about global reporting. So the first question we have to ask is, what is global reporting? Global reporting is a system function, an Air Maestro function that allows you to generate your own reports to draw whatever information you require. It includes some basic analysis, such as grouping, calculations of numeric fields, and it also allows you to schedule reports, so they're automatically generated and sent to a designated person, and it allows you to export reports information to another system, such as a billing system, through an API. So the first thing we need to look at is, do you have access to create a report? To find that out, we're going to click on My Profile on the navigation bar on the left and Access Levels. If I type in global reporting here, we can see that there's only one access level concerning it, and that is Modify All. This allows you to see every global report in your Air Maestro domain, and it allows you to create new reports. Now, because of the amount of information that you can extract using global reporting, we generally recommend that you restrict this access permission to management level and above. You do not need this permission to see a report. You can grant that to a person per report, which I will show you shortly. Okay, so to get to the global reports, we're going to click on the navigation bar on the left-hand side, and this printer icon at the bottom is global reports. We have at the top My Favorites and all of the other reports in the system down below. Columns are report name, a description of the report, which I will show you where all of this gets created, who created this report, and when the report was last run. We have some controls that allow you to edit the report, delete it, copy it, or add to favorites, which will just put it up here. So if I favorite this, let's say corrective action review, then it will appear up here. But for now, we're going to click on New Report. So creating a report is a 6-step process through this wizard. I should note that you only need to do steps 1 through 5 once, after which you can skip straight to step 6 whenever you want to draw this report. Controls down here, report module. Which section of Air Maestro do you want to draw information from? For today's webinar, I'm going to be creating 2 reports with you, one from flight records and one from safety reporting. So if I click on flight records, you can see that report area, which part of flight records do I want information from, populates with some of those options. And each report module will have different report areas, like so. Okay, so I'm going to say flight records, and there's one trick here where if you select flights with legs, then the system, that's better for extracting information from each leg of a flight. The system will actually generate a new line in the report for each leg, meaning that if I try and draw totals from the flight data instead of per leg data, we're going to get duplicates because it's going to return total flight time for the entire flight once per leg. And if I try and sum that, let's say we have a flight that was 2.3 hours with 2 legs, 1.2 and 1.1. It's going to give me 2.3, 2.3, 2.3, 2.3. So in this case, I'm just looking for totals. I'm going to select flights and custom fields. Custom fields are what you have in the flight record, which give you your calculations or however else you've structured it. In this case, I'm going to be saying flight and block time per client. Oops. And then the description, I recommend putting in what information this report is going to be returning, how it is filtered. So a report to show flight and block time, grouped by client and task type, filtered by date and client. So these clients and task type, these are custom fields we have in our flight record here on the demo site. And I can show that to you. Once we come and start drawing out those fields. Display report title means when you download the report, it will display this title here. Display report footer will give you a footer at the bottom. Display parameters shows you what filters were used to draw this particular report. As I mentioned, you do not need that modify all access to see a report to view it. That is done down here. And you can grant it per base, per department, or per person. So I want Robin to need to see this for her billing purposes. Therefore, I'll grant her that access. Okay, so that's step one done. And then we go to step two. Here we have the available and selected fields and grouping controls. Available fields is what we have available to report on, essentially. It's all of the custom fields and all of the built-in fields from the flight records. And we can see all of these with no prefix. These are all built-ins, such as the registration selection, the flight number, the flight date. These are not fields that were built in the custom field builder. Whereas these ones that say CFF, custom field flight, are ones that we have built. And they look like, let's look at this example. They look like this. These are all custom fields which are available for us to report on. One thing to note, you'll see that a few of these have ID as a suffix. ID is not generally going to mean much to you as someone viewing this report. It's a system identifier. In this case, it would just be a number. So rather than flight ID, we're going to identify a flight based on the date of the flight. So I'll bring in flight date, the registration, the route that was flown, and then flight number. It's useful to note that it may not be called flight number in your flight records themselves, as you can rename that field, but in the background, it's always going to be called flight number. So yours might be folio number or tech log number or route number, something like that. But this identifier at the top is always going to be called flight number in global reporting. And the same thing goes for the rest of these fields. If you're not familiar with the custom field builder, we do have another webinar on that. But the crux of the matter is that you have two descriptors for each custom field. One is a control name, which is what the system sees. It's how it identifies it. And that's what you'll see here. And a control label, which is what is displayed to the user when they're working on that particular page. So with that out of the way, we've got flight date, registration, route, and flight number. We also need our client and our type of flight. But I said in the description that we're actually going to group by that. So we'll not put those into the selected fields. We don't need them there. What we want is total block time, total flight time. Let's put in fuel burn as well. And let's put in distance. Then down here, we have grouping. So I'm going to select new group. I will create a group column. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting a field to group by. So if I were to select registration here, that would mean that all of the flights for certain aircraft will appear grouped together in the final report with each instance of that flight below it. And each instance of that flight will return these fields. In our case, I want to group it by client name. So I'm going to scroll down to CFF, client name, and tick that. Now I can add a second group column here, and I could say flight tasking. And I'm going to show you what this does and why you might want to do two groups instead of one group with two group columns. There's also sorting here, which we don't need for this report. Step 3 is the report layout. Here we have our columns with our flight date, our registration, our route, these which we selected in step 2, our group header and our group footer and our report footer. So our group header is whatever we selected down here in the grouping. In this case, client name and flight task. So we can go back to step 3 and I can right click in this group header here and say set group label, and simple or verbose doesn't really matter too much in this case. And what that's going to do is it's going to display how this is being grouped. It's going to give us that label. Otherwise it would still be grouped, but the grouping would be invisible. So we wouldn't have the name of the client and the flight task. In the group footer, I can right click here as well. And we have the same style, which I can use to change font and alignment options. But in this case, I want to do a calculation. So I'm going to calculate the total, which will give me the total block time per client and per task type. Let's do the same for flight time, fuel burn, and distance. I can right click on these report headers, and again I can change the style, or I can edit the label. So this is useful when you need to draw this information across to another system that requires a certain column header. You can simply edit the label and put in the header that you require. Otherwise, you can edit it to make it just a bit more human friendly. So rather than rego, I can put in aircraft registration and tidy it up however you like. We can do the same calculations in the bottom here under report footer. So in this case, I'm going to do calculate count rows, and that's going to tell me how many flights we have done based on the parameters of this report. So where group footer 1 is giving me a calculation per client name and flight task, this will be overall for all of the data returned. Below that, we have a page layout where I can choose the size and the orientation of this report, some margins left and right, and some column spacing. And then I can click next. Step 4, report filters. How do we want to filter the data? And most of the time, you're going to want to put in some sort of date filter to look at a specific set of information. In this case, I'm going to filter by flight date. So we want the beginning part of our date range, which will be flight date after or on a certain date. And another filter for flight date before or on, so the close of our date range. I'm going to come back to these two checkboxes in just a moment. Okay, so I mentioned that when you are selecting report columns in step 2, you don't generally want to select fields ending with ID, because that will just return the number that the system identifies it as. However, when you are adding filters, you really do want to select something with ID. So let's say we want to look at flights only for a specific aircraft or set of aircraft. If I try and filter by registration, it just gives me a text box, which is not really that helpful. If I select aircraft ID, on the other hand, then I get a drop-down list with a checkbox, set of checkboxes, which is much more helpful because A, we can select more than one, and B, it's not subject to typo errors. Now, I said I'd come back to these two. Or empty means this does not have to be filled in. You can run the report where this field is empty and allow edit. So you can see that I can interact with this filter here in step 4 without actually going and running the report. And there's good reason for that. Let's say I'm specifically interested in ABC, DBP, COM, and GDEBs. Just deselect that. I can add that filter here. And you can see that these are selected here in the setup. And if I disallow allow edit, if I uncheck that box, and we're going to skip ahead quickly to step 6, it will not let me change that when I come to run the report. So if you need to lock in a certain set of filters, maybe because you don't want the people who are running this to draw information you don't want them to have, then you can disallow the editing of that filter. The second point is that if I make a selection, a standard selection here in the filter setup, then when we come to step 5, which is scheduling the report or creating an API, that will be the selection that is made when automatically generating this report. So it's a standard standard set of data to be returned. Now we have two options here. One is enable API, which gives you a URL. This is an API key that you can use to send information to other programs. So if that program supports an API, you would give them this URL, and the system will automatically ask Air Maestro for the information and receive it. You can change the format by appending ampersand format equals, and that can be exported in CSV, Excel, PDF, Word, or JSON files. And you can, in the requesting program, you can set the date filters here. So date filters will always appear. We're not going to do an API now. We're going to look at a scheduled report. I should also note that whenever you enable or disable API, so if you have it and you disable it and you re-enable it, you will then have a different API key. So if you have set up that report, you will need to go and change the URL in the other program. Okay. For the schedule, we can ask the system to automatically generate this report and transmit to a certain email address or set of email addresses. So I'm going to put my email address in there. And you can have several email addresses by separating with a semicolon as per the instruction here. You can choose which format this report is transmitted in. And we have the date filter settings. So I'm going to come back to that in just a second, because that relies heavily on this next part here. And this is how often does this report need to be generated and transmitted. And you can see we've got daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, each of which has a set of options. So I can say the first day of every month, or the second, third, fourth, last day, weekday, etc., etc., etc. So I'm going to say, let's do the first day of every month. So the report will be generated on the first day, and it will look at these filters to determine what information is returned. So if we have no replacement and no replacement, it's just going to look at that first day, information from the first day only, which is not really what we want. So let's say that we want it for the previous month. We want it from the first day of the last month to the first day of this month. So after on, the beginning of the date range has to be the first day of the preceding month. So we'll say first day of the month with an offset of -1 months. And for the before on the end of the date range, we're looking at the day of the report is generated. So we'll say the current day with no offset. So I could say the current day minus 1 day, last day of the last month. Or a positive value will offset it towards the future. But in this case, 0 is fine. Then in step 6, we can draw our report and see if it's doing what we want. So I'm going to say from, let's make it April to the end of July. You can see that these selections are still here, but I'm actually going to select everything. And we have 5 options. Run the report as PDF, CSV, Excel, Word, or browser. Now, selecting the first 4 will download a file to my computer, which I can then work with. Or I can view the report in the browser. Or I can choose a quick preview. So this is more useful when you just want to verify that what you have created is correct, because it will only return the first 100 records that it finds. And it's useful to just verify that this report is returning what you want it to return. You can see that we have client name, comma, flight tasking. This is because we selected verbose, but I actually want it to be grouped differently. So let's go back to step 2, report columns. I want these to be grouped separately. So we have client name, and under that we have a new group for each flight task. Type of flight, there we go. Now any changes that you make in step 2 will reset information that you've entered in step 3. So until you're happy with the data and the layout, don't bother working too much on step 3, because you will lose it if you make changes. So with that in mind, I'm going to quickly go through this again. We've got our client name, our type of flight. You'll note that we have group header 1, group foot header 2, footer 2, and footer 1. So if I do a calculation here, total block time and group footer 2, group header 2 is the type of flight. So it's going to show me how much block time I've done for each type of flight, and the calculation in group footer 2, how much block time we've done for each client overall. And let's do that one as well. And account rows in the bottom left here. And now I've already got my filters. I've set up my schedule. None of that needs to change. I can skip straight to step 6. And let's try that again. Again, our default selections are still here, but I can select all. I'm going to run it in the browser because I'm fairly confident this is what I want. And there we go. We have our grouping, WFP Mogadishu, revenue flights, company business, maintenance, shelter in Lagos, revenue, etc., etc. So going back to this example, we have total block time for our revenue flights for WFP Mogadishu, our total block time for our company business flights for WFP Mogadishu, and our total overall for this client, as we store in step 3 of report layout. And this report is now going to be sent to me on the first day of every month, giving me information for the previous month. If you have any questions, please do feel free to raise a hand, and I will do my best to answer them. Right, let's go and look at another example. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to click New Report. In this instance, I want to create one on safety reporting and on our flight occurrence reports. Now, but I've chosen this for a good reason, and we're going to look at that. If I come here to our site setup or site settings, down to safety options, And then we go and look at our report type table. So the different types of reports we have in the system. You can see that we have a checkbox here called Exclude from Global Reports. This is useful where you have a type of report that contains sensitive information. So maybe you have something like a sensitive occurrence report to detail personal harassment or interpersonal conflicts, or something you do not want to be in the company eye for reasons of privacy, for example. In that case, you would tick Exclude from Global Reports, and then no matter what, people cannot draw information from that global report type here in global reporting. From safety report type in global reporting. This is useful because not everyone is always going to set up the filters correctly. Not everyone is always going to make reports correctly. So that's just another piece of cheese in your Swiss cheese model. Okay, so let's do a flight occurrence report. And I'm going to create one called occurrences by phase of flight. And we're doing this, I want to see as a safety manager, where are we seeing the most occurrences? Which phase of flight do we need to focus on improving our safety mitigators or controls? For our description, reports grouped by phase of flight, filtered by date and risk. Again, I can grant access to someone who does not have that modify all access permission over here. And I'm going to display parameters here as well. So occurrence ID, remember ID is a system identifier. It's not necessarily useful for a person viewing it. And here we're going to look at event date and time. So when did this occur? Event type, was it an incident or an accident? I want the initial risk. And let's say the current risk. I want the report title. Let's say report number as well. And you do have to come and look through these sometimes. Unfortunately, there's no good way I can recommend there's no secret to knowing what's what. If you're not sure what something will return, build a report, include that field, and see what comes out. So let's say aircraft, and there's title. That's what I was looking for. I can reorder these as I wish. So I want report number, title, time. And then where you see CF, that is again a custom field. And tab A, tab B, tab C will be all of the different tabs that could potentially be included in your report. So we can come back and look at this if we so choose. For now, I'm going to ignore it because we want a basic summary. So I said I'd group it by phase of flight. So let's add a group column. And phase of flight is actually a custom field in one of our report tabs. I believe it's tab B. Here it is, phase. And then I also want it grouped by risk. Whether it's initial risk or current risk, I'm going to say initial risk. And while I think of it, let's include our category. I think that should give us what we want. So one thing I'd like you to note is when I bring in a new field, it's actually reset the ordering to the way it was as I brought the fields in. So bring what you want into the report first, and then order it as you wish. So report number, title, date, time, type, risk. That looks good to me. Got our two groups. So let's go next to report layout. I'm going to right click in the group headers as we did in the previous example. We've got our phase of flight, our initial risk level. I want to see how many we're getting of each. So I'm going to do a calculate count rows. It's going to tell me how many reports we've had per risk value per phase of flight. So this one here is our risk. We need to do a group footer one count rows to see how many reports we've had per phase of flight. The rest of these, again, if I were making an actual report for use, I would make these report column headers a bit more human friendly, but for now we're going to move on past. Again, we're going to look at a date range. So I'm going to choose event date time. After or on to get the beginning of our date range. And event date time. Before or on to get the end of our date range. I could add something else such as base ID. And remember that we're selecting base ID because if we select base name, then we just get a text box, which is not as useful. So I'm going to select base ID and see what's happening per base. You might consider that grouping it by base instead of filtering by base might be more useful, but that's a decision that you would have to make according to the requirements of your report. So we're going to skip through step 5 and have a look at step 6. I'm going to click on the dates. Let's make it July 2019 to the 1st of July 2020, and we're interested in all of our bases. So let's have a look at what we get. And you can see that some of these have not been filled out because these do not have a phase of flight. So someone has skipped those. But we have here landing, 1 of low, 1 of extreme, 1 of medium, 1 of high. Approach, 5 of extreme, 3 low, 4 high. So it seems like approach is actually one of our most critical phases of flight according to the specifics of our operation, the actual data that we're getting. And from here you can start seeing what type of incidents, because I have included these report categories. So we can see here that we're having a lot of airprox incidents at a certain base. And from there you can work on what your potential mitigators might be. Okay, and that is pretty much all we have for global reporting. As you can see, it's a very powerful tool. The reporting wizard is not too long, and once you have created a report, you can draw that report at any time. So someone who does not have that modify all access in their profile should not be able to edit or delete a report. They will only be able to click on this magnifying glass here, which will take them directly to step 6. They will be able to change any filters that you have included, unless you have disallowed editing of that filter in step 4, in which case it would be locked in. So if I want to look at July 2019 to July 2020, for the first one we created, they would only get flights for these 4 aircraft. Okay, that concludes the content of our webinar. If you would like assistance, please do contact help@cairnaviation.com. I will open the floor to any questions for the next 5 minutes. But as I say, if you need assistance with your company, please send an email to help@cairnaviation.com, and one of our support staff will get back to you and help you address the specifics of your requirement. Oh, I should mention, all of our webinars are uploaded to our YouTube channel. It's on YouTube as Cairn Aviation. If you cannot find that, then we do have a link on our website as well, cairnaviation.com. If you like this content, please do like and share it. It does help us. And I thank you very much for joining us today.